Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Star Wars Library. Today we're going to keep going in our coverage with Tales of the Bounty Hunters to finish off this collection of short stories. So let's go ahead and do this. We are, like I said, still continuing through this lovely trade paperback of stories here. So, the first one is Of Possible Futures, Tales of Zuckuss and Forlom by M. Shane Bell. So in this one, it takes place right after the Battle of Hoth, and Torrin Farr is this guy's name, and basically Farr is trying to escape from the Empire. She's trying to coordinate all this. So Zuckuss, it's revealed, the bounty hunter, is revealed that he can actually see the future. Can kind of use like these meditations. It's almost, it seems to me that it's implied that it's some force techniques. So basically Zuckuss can do this. Forlom is seeing this and is like, oh, like trying to understand this and trying to figure it out. You know, again, because Forlom's a droid, he's trying to process this and make sense of it. So Zuckuss is actually ill, and is and might be killed by some enemies here. So Forlom thinks that because of his ability to see into the future, they can use that to try and capture the rebel Torgon and try to get in or to ally themselves with them or her, and then they can kind of use that to try and get into the alliance so they can get to Han Solo to get that bounty. Of course, Darth Vader brings them on, they go off, and through all of this, they actually end up joining the Rebel Alliance, and they're like, well, we've been doing this, and we're just going to stay here. We're just going to work for them. So definitely a fun little tale. Now here's the big one here. This is probably, I believe it might be the longest one, and it's the one that, it might be the longest one. But everyone and their mother, well, they used to freak out about it. I don't know if they really do anymore, but sometimes you'll still hear people refer to this as why the EU sucked. And that is The Last One Standing, The Tale of Boba Fett. This is by Daniel Keyes Moran. So, save the Boba Fett story for the last, right? So, there's a lot to unpack with this one, so let's go ahead and do it. So it begins with Jaster Muriel, and it's actually Boba Fett, but he starts with this, and then it flashes forward in time. So right off the bat, you might think, oh, there's a contradiction. He starts off as Jaster Muriel. He's not Boba Fett. Well, it was revealed later throughout like Lucasfilm and other retcons that Boba Fett was using Jaster Muriel as a fake identity to lie low, and basically you're peeling back the onion a little bit. Don't take it at face value. But that came a little bit later because again, when this is written, this is 1995, 1996. Attack of the Clones wouldn't come out until 2002, so we didn't know yet all of Boba Fett's backstory. So, but again, that's what the EU did. When things came, they just edited it or, peeled back some of the layers and boom, it fits. I still think, so while there are kind of, this and then it got, kind of retconned or further elaborated a little bit later on, I still think it's important to mention this because it does show how the expanded universe evolved over time, which is the whole point of the show, is to see that evolution of it growing. From when it first came around in 1976. So basically, he starts off as Jaster Muriel, and then he takes on the name Boba Fett later. That's kind of what the story is saying. Because the Jaster Muriel is actually framed for murder in this story. So it kind of sets up the early years of Boba Fett, and it kind of sets up a rivalry because he will encounter a young Han Solo. So, Empire Strikes Back happens. The events of that movie takes place, and then it goes into, like, he's in Jabba's palace, and I think he talks to Princess Leia, if I remember correctly, and then he witnesses the sail barge fight in Return of the Jedi, and then he falls into the Sarlacc. So then the story takes place into the present, which is actually much, much later. It actually is around the time of, I believe, the Hand of Thrawn duology, and pretty dang close to the New Jedi Order. It's actually around that time when the story takes place. And basically, Boba's doing a bounty. He ends up meeting up with Han Solo, and they kind of have this whole the good, bad, and the ugly standoff. And it actually ends kind of like where they're like, we can't kill each other because we can't live without the other kind of thing. And that's pretty much how it ends. It doesn't show what happens. It just has them pointing, guns at each other or blasters. But obviously, as we all know, because of New Jedi Order and other stories, Hand of Thrawn and all that, they both survive. But it's a fun little story. The comic book, which we'll talk about eventually, Jango Fett Open Seasons, kind of aids in this. Kind of introduces Jaster Mareel as a Mandalorian who took in Jango Fett. So in the Mandalorian world, that would make Jaster Boba's grandfather. And so they kind of use that, and he uses that name, and then goes back to being Boba Fett. There's some other things here, or that, kind of hints at, like Dark Empire hints that he was like a former stormtrooper. This story says he's Jaster Mareel. He was like a farmer, an employee or whoever got, that got framed. But again, that kind of adds, but we know what really happens. But again, that's where you peel back the onion, or the authors and whatnot, Lucasfilm, and adding, these different retcons. And yeah, I mean, Boba Fett, I think from the very moment he showed up in Empire for the first time, I mean, even the holiday special before that, he was always kind of a mysterious character. So to me, all these different backstories, I think Boba Fett would encourage that. Because again, there's just that mystery to that character. So I don't think this story and any future things does anything to contradict or anything like that. Again, you just got to peel back the layers. So I enjoyed the story. We're going to talk about one more thing just because it is incredibly short, and it's actually the X-Wing Rogue Squadron. It's a comic book, but it's a special. And it's actually written by Ryder Wynnum. Now, this was actually, I think it had a tie into like Apple Jacks, the cereal, and eventually it was released in other collections, particularly the Epic Collection, the New Republic Volume 2, which is where I have it collected. And so this is it here. Yeah, just called X-Wing Rogue Squadron Special. So basically, on the planet Tandikin, I think is how you pronounce it, there's this Imperial remnant. They're attacking the people. They're, freaking out, and they're like, you're going to answer to the Empire. And then Rogue Squadron shows up, and a pretty cool image, actually, where they come flying in to the AT-AT. And they're fighting, and they're, blowing up stormtroopers and everything, and it's great. And then to destroy all these TIE fighters that are lined up, that are about to take off, one of the pilots, and it's actually Wedge shoots this tower, and it comes flying down, and it crushes all the TIE fighters, saving it. Well, then, of course, basically, it turns out to be the people of the planet. It's their greatest monument, and so everyone's freaking out, like, how could you do this, Wedge? So Wedge is upset. One of the other pilots shows up, or just there's another rebel pilot, and the pilot's like, guys, like, Wedge, you go take a walk, okay? I'm gonna explain to all these people how great you are. And basically, he just starts talking about, Wedge fought at the Battle of Yavin, and even though he didn't get a medal, he survived Darth Vader. And then he led in the Battle of Hoth, and then he took over Rogue Squadron, and then he became this commander, and he did the Battle of Endor. Basically, all of Wedge's greatest hits from the original trilogy. Very little talking about any other things. It's pretty much just that. And everyone's like, wow, we shouldn't have been so harsh on Wedge Antilles. He's a great guy. Hey, how come you know Wedge so well? Well, what's your name? Well, my name is Luke Skywalker, and I'm at your service. And then everyone's like, oh, it's Luke Skywalker. And then he takes R2 and 3PO, and he's like, let's go get an oil bath. And that's pretty much the story. It's very, very short, and it's pretty much just kind of introducing, the idea of Wedge Antilles to other people. Like, I get it because, Wedge is, he was in the movies, but he wasn't in the forefront as like Luke, Han, Leia, or Lando, for that matter. So I think it was kind of a way to tie in and get people to read some of these X-Wing Rogue Squadron comics, or even, the upcoming novels, because you get to know Wedge, and you're like, oh, okay, here's like, he's going to be the main character. Why should we care? Like, I get it. And you're using Luke Skywalker, to kind of introduce that. So from a marketing and business, and I get it. And again, it's a very short story and it's meant for Apple Jacks. It's fun. I mean, I as much as I kind of kid and dog on it, it's a fun read. I mean, I enjoyed reading it. It's not very long. I actually just reread the whole thing shortly before recording to make sure I was up to date on this thing. So it's not very long. It's a very quick read, but it's fun. So anyways, these two stories, let's start with these. The Tales of the Bounty Hunters as a whole, are they essential? No, they're not. But I do think that you should definitely read it. I think that they're great short stories. I think it just gives more depth and more meaning to the bounty hunters. So when you see them in Empire, you're like, oh, I know so-and-so. And that was the whole point of these, right? They did it with Mos Eisley. And then they do it here. And they're going to do it with Jabba's palace and other things too. So I don't think that this is essential, but I think that this will give you much more background and more, context for these characters. And so when you see them in not only Empire or any other movie or any other EU source, you know more about them. And that's one of the great things about the EU, right? Is it expands the universe. You learn new things. So it's not essential, but I would read this. As for the X-Wing Rogue Squadron special in here, no, not essential. I mean, if you like the X-Wing comics, you like Wedge Antilles, definitely pick it up if you can, or if you're a completist and want to have everything. But honestly, it doesn't really impact any X-Wing Rogue Squadron series comics or novels or anything like that. It's just a fun extra story, nothing much, but it's not bad either. So anyways, folks, thank you so much for tuning in today, and I will see you next time with another episode of the Star Wars Library.